All right, well, welcome everybody to the Wilton E. Scott Institute for Energy Innovation. My name is Daniel Tachik. I'm the Executive Director here at the Scott Institute for Energy Innovation. We are so excited for you all to join us today for our Tech Talk with Joe Daniel. I'm going to keep my remarks about Joe short because we have a special friend of his going to be introducing him today. But before we get started, just a quick housekeeping note. We're trying to keep these events as low waste or as zero waste as possible. All of the utensils and plates that you're using are compostable, so just do us a favor. Please use the green compostable bag near the exit of this room when you're disposing of your waste. Yes, Caitlin is showing off. It's just by the door. So just to keep everything fully compostable, please use the green bags by the door. Thank you. In case you're unfamiliar with the Scott Institute, we are Carnegie Mellon's hub for all things energy. We give out seed funding each year to help grow new energy research projects. We also create and accelerate climate and energy research initiatives. So you might imagine energy and climate are such broad topics. We have folks, faculty affiliates all across campus in economics and business, physics, chemistry, you name it. And so it's our job as the Scott Institute to make sure that we are bringing people together from all parts of campus to work together to collaborate on new research initiatives. We also support our founders and innovative startups in energy and climate. So much like our seed funding that we give out for energy research, we also give out entrepreneurship funding to help our entrepreneurs in the room navigate the many valleys of death that you're all familiar with. And then lastly, we promote the CMU climate and energy community by hosting many events such as today's Tech Talk. So really, at the end of the day, what we truly care about is catalyzing the development of breakthrough technologies, systems, and policies that accelerate us to a sustainable net zero energy future. So if you aren't already subscribed, I encourage you to pull out your phone, scan this QR code. This is our monthly newsletter. I know emails are crazy. This is just once a month. And if you're ever curious of what's happening on campus related to energy and climate, this is your one-stop shop. We email you once a month. We talk about events such as this event today, but also other funding opportunities or other events that are happening across campus in the areas of energy and climate. And then one major plug I want to share with you all is next month we will be holding our flagship event, CMU Energy Week. So the shown here are just a few of the speakers that we will have featured at the event. We have many more on our website. This year's theme is reinventing the grid for our electrified future. There are many things to talk about related to that, and one big thing that we will be talking about, and we'll have a whole panel discussion around it, is affordability. And that is very, very central to what Joe Daniel will be talking about today. So I always say, and it's true, there is truly something for everybody at Carnegie Mellon University Energy Week, including our students. We would love student volunteers. You likely have seen emails pop in your inbox about volunteering for Energy Week. We will be naming you student ambassadors of CMU Energy Week. But then there's also an opportunity to participate in a student research poster competition. That deadline is today, but you still have time. All you have to do is submit a one-paragraph abstract of a poster you might be interested in doing a poster about. So we look forward to seeing your submissions. That poster competition will be happening on the first day of Energy Week on March 17th. And then, with that, I would love to invite Professor Destiny Knock to the podium to share a few remarks and introduce today's speaker. Professor Knock is an assistant professor, soon to be associate, in the Civil and Environmental Engineering Department and the Engineering and Public Policy Department at CMU. We are honored to have Joe here today because of Professor Knock's recommendation, so I'm excited to have her give a few remarks and introduce today's speaker. So please join me in giving Professor Knock a round of applause.
Sweet. So, hi, everybody. So I get the pleasure of introducing Joe Daniel. So Joe is a principal in RMI's carbon-free electricity team, where he leads the development and deployment of quantitative tools that can help accelerate affordable and equitable utility decarbonization pathways. He actually began his career in 2005 modeling energy use and fugitive emissions at a petrochemical facility outside of Mobile, Alabama. He went on to work as an engineering consultant at more than 30 oil refineries, natural gas facilities, and power plants, so very knowledgeable in the field. Since 2011, he has focused on the electric utility industry, where he's worked on over 100 utility proceedings across the country and authored expert testimony in response to state, regional, and federal energy policy proposals. And then prior to joining RMI, Joe was the electricity markets manager at the Union of Concerned Scientists, an analyst for the Beyond Coal campaign at the Sierra Club, and an associate at Synapse Energy Economics. And so Joe is an active member of the U.S. Association of Energy Economists and has served as a technical advisor to the NARUC NASEO Joint Task Force on Comprehensive Electricity Planning. He has earned his MPA in Environmental Science and Policy from Columbia University, as well as a BS in Chemical Engineering from Florida Institute of Technology. And we also have made history by being one of the most hospitable universities Joe has ever been to. So go CMU, go us. And now please continue the hospitality by welcoming him to the stage.
Thank you for that introduction. And it's true, I am blown away by just how hospitable the students and faculty have been here at Carnegie Mellon. So thank you all very much. I'm really excited to share with you all, unfortunately, you've been all hospitable to me, but CMU just came black text, so I don't know if any of you can actually read that. But it does give you credit for this presentation. How many people here are familiar with RMI? All right, so some familiarity. So RMI is a global independent nonprofit. We have roughly 700 staff across the globe. We are a matrix organization, so we operate in terms of geographies: the United States, China, India, Africa, islands in the Caribbean, and in terms of topics like electricity, buildings, transportation, heavy industry, and finance. In the U.S., RMI supports the decision makers and policymakers and stakeholders of the electric grid to help foster a prosperous, clean, dependable electric grid for all. My team, I joke, is the island of misfit toys because we build a lot of just tools and models that can be used by other individuals, other organizations. But my work spreads across issues related to energy poverty, electric rural cooperatives, utility financial issues, and then just sort of the day-to-day utility regulation. I want to give a special thanks to the team that supports me on working on energy poverty. I sent this slide deck to them yesterday at 10 o'clock and said, I need to get this final draft to Carnegie Mellon in 2 hours. If you all could take a look at it, that'd be great. And then they updated all of the slides with the latest statistics. So I'm going to be working against muscle memory because I remember some of these numbers from where they were 3 months ago. And this is the first time we've had the updated numbers presented. So I'm excited about that, but I'm also going to be checking my notes a few more times than I usually have to. So this is what I'm going to talk about today. We're going to have a quick check-in. We're going to talk about the energy affordability crisis, how we know we can solve energy poverty in the United States. And then RMI's, I just think this is such a cool tool that we've built called the Energy Poverty Policy Simulator. And I'll be going over that a little bit at the very end. So let's start off with a quick check-in. And I want to take notes on this, but I don't have my pen and paper. So I want to do a raise of hands. How many people think that we could end energy poverty before the end of 2030 in the United States? Could we end energy poverty by 2030? I see 2, 3 hands. All right. Before 2035. Okay, 4, 5 hands. Before 2040. All right, 3, 6, 7, 8. Before 2050? All right, and then who thinks that we can never solve energy poverty in the United States? It's okay, raise your hand. That's a perfectly legitimate opinion. Yeah. And I think this all comes down to how realistic do you think it is to actually implement the policies? Because whatever your answer is, the answer is we could do it functionally in 6 months. The policies that we have in place today, we know exactly what policies We know how to fund them. We know how to get rapid adoption of these policies. The question is essentially political will to pay for them and to make it happen. It's not a engineering problem. It is not, like, there are legitimate engineering problems on the electric grid today, right? How do you integrate huge amounts of renewable adoption that have low inertia and are subject to voltage fluctuation on a grid that currently relies on steam power turbines to keep the grid stable? Like, that's a real engineering problem. But energy poverty is not an engineering problem. It is simply an implementation of policy. So let's start off. There was a recent paper that I read. I'm not going to throw shade at anybody by naming names, but who cast doubt on the idea that there really is an energy crisis, an energy affordability crisis in the United States. And their assertion was that energy bills have effectively remained flat for most states in the United States, that adjusted for inflation or adjusting for income, electric bills have stayed flat. And so how can there be an energy crisis if energy bills have remained flat? And I think part of the issue comes down to how we define energy affordability. And so the definition that RMI uses, which is used by, I think, a lot of other folks, maybe to some variation, is it's the ability to pay your household energy costs without foregoing other basic necessities or compromising health or safety. So what's an example of that? You choose to not buy as much groceries. You choose to keep your house at an unhealthy temperature. These are examples of compromising your health or safety in order to pay your energy bill. So why would somebody do that? Why would somebody forego food or medicine in order to pay their electric bill? I think this is a really fundamental thing. I think many people in this room probably already know this, but it's worth repeating. And that is, when you get disconnected, you lose access to your AC unit to keep yourself healthy at all, or to lose access to your refrigerator to keep your food safe. You can get exposed to the elements once that disconnection occurs. You could face eviction from not paying your electric bill, and people die from not paying their electric bill. And yet, in all of my time talking with state utility commissioners and regulators and energy offices, the number one fact that seems to be a light bulb in people's brains is that you can lose custody of your children for not paying your electric bill. That if your household does not have access to heating or cooling or refrigeration, Child Protective Services can step in. And I think anybody who is a parent or an aunt or uncle or just lives in society can understand that a parent would happily go hungry in order to keep custody of their child. And so these are the decisions that many Americans are facing on a daily basis, on a monthly basis, when they get their energy bills. It's also important because there's an energy poverty cycle where a bill is issued, and then because it is difficult to pay for it, they maybe miss a payment, or they only are able to pay it partially, in which case they get a late or partial payment fee. Those arrearages start to accumulate, and then eventually they can't pay the bill, and so they get disconnected. And they also get a disconnection fee because they couldn't pay, which I think is incredibly counterintuitive. And then if they want to get reconnected, they have to pay all of their arrears and a reconnection fee. So they've maybe scraped together all of the money they can, and then the very next month they face a new energy bill. And so this whole cycle starts over and over and over again. When we talk about 3% or 5% of, or now it's much higher. Back when I started, it was pretty reasonable to assume 3% of customers weren't paying their electric bill. But it's the same 3% over and over and over again. It's not like those people get disconnected and then they get forgotten about. I mean, they do get forgotten about, but it's not like they then just live without electricity. Most of them will find a way to get back on the electric grid, to get a new bill. Some people will actually sign up under their children's names because they have been blacklisted because of non-payment. So this is a pervasive, persistent problem. And I think it's important to also recognize, and I'll talk a little bit more about this later, that is not felt evenly across all households in America. So what are the indications that the crisis, the affordability issue, is getting worse? So these are some of the statistics. It used to be about 1/8 to 1/10 of customers were unable to pay their energy bill in full. Now it's up to 1/6. In California, it's 1/3. It's probably going to be 1/5 by the end of this year. Arrears, the amount of uncollected customer bills or customer utility debt, has risen 37.5% between, January of 2022 to March of 2025. This is why I'm glad my team put all the numbers in here, so that way I didn't have to remember the start date and end date. And now we're talking about a $25 billion outstanding utility customer debt. So these numbers are all on the rise. So even though bills have remained flat, energy affordability, people's ability to pay their electric bill has gone down because it's part of a larger system, right? Often I work in the electric space, right? I don't even work on gas very often. I'm electric state regulated utilities focused. And so it's very easy to be focused on that part of the system. One of the things that I love about RMI is we really encourage making the problem bigger to make it easier to solve. And that's part of the issue here, is that it's part of a larger problem of affordability crisis, of housing affordability, of food affordability, right? I think it'd be very hard to argue that there isn't a large swath of the population that struggle to pay their energy bills or pay their bills in general day to day. And who are those people? It's exactly who you would expect. It's folks that live at or below the federal poverty line that have a 20-to-1 outsized energy burden. Now I know Destiny will happily correct me on energy burden not being the perfect metric, but in my defense, it's really easy to measure. And that's why we use it so frequently. I'll also point out that the energy burdens and classifications that we have here, that we haven't showed, that's what RMI uses. ACEEE, great organization, they use different ones. DOE uses different. There are so many different ways to cut what the right thresholds are. I included this not because I think these are the one right way to do it, but just so that we have a common language. When I'm talking today, when I talk about energy stressed or energy burdened, these are the numbers and thresholds that I'm talking about. And I'm also seeing some interesting display from my PowerPoint that says other gas and electric. It's a little confusing to read. You see if you're living at or below the federal poverty line, 20% of your income is going to household energy costs, right? That doesn't include transportation. That doesn't account for other housing expenses. This is just what you put on your electric bill. If you are 400% of the federal poverty line or higher, it's about 20 times less. It's about 1% of your costs. So, for a very long time in my career, I focused on averages. What was the average energy bill, average energy burden for the average customer nationally or at the state? And once I started seeing the breakdown by income group, it completely turned my head about as an energy economist, I wanted to control for all the variables. I wanted to control for inflation. I wanted to control for heating degree days, cooling degree days. I wanted to control for local geographies and weather. And by controlling for all of those things, I actually lost the signal. That the signal is in all of the variability of the data rather than these national averages. So even what I'm displaying here is an imperfect way to communicate about energy burden. But again, it's really hard to show all of that data that I just described. It's 5 dimensions, right? That's very hard to visualize. So how do we solve energy poverty? How do we end energy poverty in the United States? It's a very simple 3-step plan. You adopt the right policies, you pay for them, and then you increase adoption. Very simplified. Obviously, the practicality of doing these individual things is very challenging. So what are the core policies that break that energy poverty cycle? Well, the first is direct assistance through things like LIHEAP, weatherization programs. Federal government comes in, gives a bunch of money to the state distributes it to low-income customers to make energy more affordable. For those who have not been tracking, there's been a lot of debate about LIHEAP staff at HHS, And so now even states are starting to get involved in doing some direct energy assistance. Maryland, Massachusetts have all implemented some new policies. Illinois is looking at it, probably some other states that I'm not aware of. But essentially, it's a wealth transfer, if you want to use the technical term. But it is the way of getting people who can't afford energy to pay for the people who can't afford energy. Low-income energy efficiency programs are also incredibly popular. I actually found out that there are some states that do not have carve-outs for low-income energy efficiency. I'm not typically in the business of making recommendations to states and telling states how they should run their electric grid. This is one where I'm okay saying, yeah, no, states, you need to have low-income energy carve-outs. And the reason why low-income carve-outs are really important is because they provide benefits that general energy efficiency programs don't, and they channel the benefits and they channel the assistance to the people who most need it. Low-income discount rates and rebates are another popular policy. We're not quite at half the number of states that have it, but just in the past year, 3 state legislators or state legislations, state houses, passed laws to require the creation of low-income rates. And one of the reasons why low-income rates are not more popular is because of clauses known as non-discrimination or non-discriminatory rates that prohibit public utility commissions from having differentiated rates within a customer class. So in the electric grid, we think about commercial, industrial, residential customer classes. And within those classes, all customers have to be on the same rate or have access to the same rate schedule. And so states are now modifying those laws to allow for low-income rates, special rates. Percentage of income payment plans, interestingly, technically do not have to be exclusive to only low-income customers. But as we saw in the graph before, the only people that tend to have high energy burdens are lower income customers. These essentially set your energy bill to a certain percentage of your income. So they require income verification. Then there's disconnection protections. Disconnections disproportionately impact those who can't afford their energy bills. And arrearage management plans, which are just ways of, once you get caught up in all of those arrears, of a way of paying off that debt. So those are the policies that help break that cycle. But the question that inevitably comes up in the public policy process is, how do you pay for it? And traditionally, there are 5 ways that we see these programs getting paid for. Federal taxes, state taxes, and ratepayer funded are by far the most popular, with ratepayer funded being by far and away the most voluminous, like the most amount of money comes through ratepayers. And the reason why is because when a state policy, whether it's an energy efficiency program or RPS or anything, gets passed by the state, they usually don't have a way of raising money to pay for it. So they charge the commission with enforcing it, and so the commission tells the utility to do it, and the utility gets cost recovery from other ratepayers. So whether it's a discount rate or energy efficiency standard, other ratepayers pay the costs. The problem with that, again, if we look at the distribution of who pays how much, electric rates are considerably more regressive than most tax structures. So federal taxes is a much more progressive way to pay for a lot of these energy policies. And my team did some analysis on LIHEAP, for example, because when you and I don't pay our electric bills, or let's say when our neighbors don't pay their electric bills, you and I pay for them. When you have a program like LIHEAP that helps people pay their electric bill, you and I all benefit from that. Our electric bills are lower because of LIHEAP. And so if we increased LIHEAP funding, we would actually lower the electric bills for everybody else. So federal tax is actually a really great way. Not every state has income taxes. Some state, it's property tax or sales tax. So it's really quite dependent when you pay for things through state taxes. The 2 much less common ways to pay for things are through special tariffs, which right now are having a moment in our industry with large load tariffs for data centers. And we have seen a handful, less than 5, examples where the utility or regulator or party in the stipulation in the settlement agreement for the large load tariff have got a way to say, all right, Google, we will allow you to have this large load tariff. We will pay you. This is how we'll structure your payments, but you have to kick in $10 million to our state energy efficiency program or to our low income energy assistance program. And it turns out, and I did a quick calculation. There's supposed to be, again, projections on how much data center growth is going to happen is object for great debate. But based off of a very cursory search, it looks like Pennsylvania is slated to get about 30 gigawatts of data centers by 2030. If those data centers were willing to pay just $2 a megawatt hour more, and keep in mind they're paying hundreds of dollars per megawatt hour right now just to get secured access to energy. So if they were able to pay $2 a megawatt hour more, you could fill the gap of LIHEAP to be where its current level is, to entirely eliminating energy poverty in Pennsylvania. So to get everybody to an electric rate of 4% or below. Then that might not actually eliminate all of the energy limiting behavior, but it would be a huge chunk out of the energy affordability crisis in Pennsylvania for just this one class to pay $2. Now that's not a policy recommendation. It's a way of providing some social math of like how small the solution would have to be in order, if we focus those benefits to those who most need it. And then shareholder, this is pretty common in a rate case where the utility is just trying to get its new rate base and trying to get its new profit settled, and they will agree to say, all right, our shareholders will kick in X million dollars to an energy efficiency program, low income outreach, arrearage for DTE during the pandemic had a shareholder funded arrearage forgiveness plan where they forgave tens of millions of dollars in arrears just in order to settle a rate case. So it's very less common. It's more ad hoc, not a great policy per se, but it is an avenue. All right. So there are, generally speaking, 5 ways to increase adoption of these policies. The first way is something called self-certification, where essentially the customer says, yes, I am eligible for this program. This reduces the administrative costs of low-income programs so much. It actually, in several places, like in the Washington Avista utility, found that switching to self-certification, that even with the free ridership, offset the administration costs. That the administration costs were like 10 to 15% of the program. The free ridership was about 3% of the program. So self-attestation, self-certification, great way to increase adoption, dramatically reduces the administrative costs. So it helps you get these programs to the folks that need it. Right? That's why you need to, like, for example, LIHEAP in Pennsylvania, only about 20%, 21% of people eligible for LIHEAP in Pennsylvania receive LIHEAP benefits. So part of that is a lack of funding, but part of that is education. Part of that is just like getting this into the people's hands. Some of it has to do with people don't want to sign up for federal programs right now because they don't want their information going to the federal government. So there's a lot of struggles with getting people to just sign up for essentially free money, right? So like the traditional economists would be like, oh, there's no such thing as free. Like this is free money for the individual, right? It's taxpayer funded, but from your rational actor perspective, there should not be a adoption problem for these programs, and yet 20, 30% adoption is pretty typical. The second strategy is data matched enrollment, where you essentially look at the other state programs like SNAP or any other low-income programs and say, if you are eligible for that, you become automatically eligible for your utilities low-income program. And then the new one that is gaining some interesting data on, there's only a couple pilots, one in California, one in Minnesota. It's place-based enrollment, where you say, based off of this census tract, So again, only 2 examples of this, so I'm just going to use one for the illustrative purposes. In Minnesota, they looked at the census tracts where the energy burden was above 10%. The average energy burden in that census tract was above 10%. Automatically enrolled them in a $46 a month credit. You can opt out if you want, right? Like, it's not forced on your bill, but rather than go through any of the issues of self-certification or outreach so that people have to self-certify and get on the program, they just are automatically enrolled based off of their address. Again, really high adoption, much lower administrative costs, and if you target it correctly, you're going to really increase adoption. Now, place-based enrollment shouldn't mean that you don't also have other adoption policies, because you can't get 100% of eligible customers just through place-based, but it allows you to get a lot more for a lot less. Then there's your traditional marketing and outreach. And today, in today's setting, we actually need to think about more, a lot of these programs are focused on people that are 200% FPL or lower. And we might need to be thinking about people that are at a expanded income groups, so moderate income, medium income, because even those families are starting to struggle. So here we come to the Energy Poverty Policy Simulator. This was an idea that I had during the pandemic, about 5-6 years ago. There was an effort to increase LIHEAP funding. There was a proposal, and we were asked how much would it cost to end energy poverty. And the original calculation I wanted to do kept on breaking my Excel, and so I just did a quick back-of-the-envelope calculation, and I came up with $40 billion to end energy poverty in the United States. And then I was sharing this with one of my colleagues, Maria Castillo, the idea that I had, and she said, I can build that. And I thought, all right, well, let's do it. And so about a year later, we built the Energy Poverty Policy Simulator. We had every intention of coming up with a better name, but we didn't. She was able to build it faster than we were able to come up with a better name. It essentially looks at all of the policies that I've described so far, all of the funding mechanisms that I've described so far, and then models those effects on electric rates, bills, and energy burden to see how effective they are at addressing that problem. It also accounts for the cost shift, right? If it's a ratepayer-funded program that delivers benefits to those living at or below the federal poverty line, then customers that live above the federal poverty line will see an increase. So part of the goal here is that cost shift is the center of every state public utility commission debate on low-income programs, that we don't want to increase costs for other customers. And what our theory was, our hypothesis was, it's not as big a cost shift as you think, because nobody was actually putting the numbers down on paper in any of these proceedings. And we wanted to give folks a starting point for what that cost shift would be. What we found was my original estimate of $40 billion was way off. It was closer to 20. That actually, if you really target the benefits and you assumed no friction and no additional administrative cost, very simplified, you would actually only need about 20 billion. And that because this reduces rates for everybody, right? More on-time payments, less customer debt, it actually would reduce electric rates by about 5% for everybody else if it was all federally funded. And if it was not federally funded, if it was funded through ratepayers, it would only increase electric bills by about $3 a month for most customers. So the question I have for policymakers and for you in this room is, would you be willing to pay $3 a month more on your electric bill in order to end energy poverty in your state? And I think most people I talk to, that really turns a light bulb in their head of like, oh, this is not as big of a problem as we tend to think it is. And so this is not a tool for rate making, right? I would not suggest taking the results of this model and then putting it into rates and say, we're going to create the actual tariff sheet for residential or commercial customers based off of the outputs of this. But it's designed to start the conversation and allow users to play around with the different policies and determine what can we do. And the other thing that this does is it really drives home that you can just say, like, increase LIHEAP 200%, and these are the effects of it. But those are often much harder for the state commissioners to control. And so there's multiple policies that you can dial in. You can do a little bit on a lot of things rather than going all in on one thing and still achieve that same outcome, right? There's multiple pathways. There's trade-offs based off of funding mechanism and all that. But if we can just increase adoption, if we can just do this, just a little bit of that, we can stepwise get closer to solving this problem. The tool is set up with state selection and policies on the left and a series of graphics on the right that allow you to essentially hit execute, and it just updates pretty quickly each time, so you can run multiple scenarios and look at all sorts of different iterations of how much adoption affects the cost shift versus what happens when you pay for arrearage management through shareholder funds, but you pay for the bulk of the energy efficiency through all customers versus paying for energy efficiency through just residential customers. It allows, this is, I think, mostly what I just said. And then we also look at other, what we call cost control policies. These are the policies that help reduce the bills for everybody. Things like reforming the utilities' regulated return on equity, their profit margins, or improving dispatch of power plants to be more economic, right? And these things, it turns out, are not nearly as effective at addressing the energy poverty problem because they're not targeted, right? The targeted element means, sure, economic dispatch might save $100 million, but it's spread across all ratepayers. And so it actually reduces the individual's energy burden by much less than when we target these benefits to those who need it. So we can just do a cheat code and say, all right, we're going to put in a percentage of income payment plan for all customers equal to this percentage of their income. We have eliminated energy poverty on paper. And we could do that either by rate making or by increasing LIHEAP. And ultimately, that works like that on paper. But then when you go into the states, try to get them to adopt these policies, it can be more challenging. And so part of the value of this tool is not the most efficient way to solve the problem, right? It's not an optimization tool intentionally. It's about allowing for various stakeholders to discuss, all right, here are the trade-offs. Here's how we can dial in these policies in a way that we can all come to consensus to actually affect change rather than, oh, well, all we need to do is increase LIHEAP funding. Well, most commissioners have no control over that, all right? So that gets very frustrating for them just to pass the buck on to the federal government. They want to know what they can do, and this tool is designed to help those conversations. And I want to say one thing about the tool. We assumed there's not really good evidence on, let me rephrase that. There is not readily agreed upon national data on the effect of what low-income programs do for other people's rates. There's lots of great anecdotal evidence. My favorite piece from just last month was in Wisconsin. The utility is going to do a $750,000 pilot program for direct energy assistance in the 3 counties that have the highest energy burden. And they expect for a $1 million ratepayer benefit in return. That's the same year of the policy. So it's a 0-year payback period. It is a almost instant benefit. And that's because of increased on-time bill payment, better cash flow, lower carrying costs. There's all these financial benefits to the utility that says it's a 1 point plus benefit to cost ratio. But we only assumed a 0.5 benefit cost ratio in ours. So a lot of our, we are intentionally a little bit conservative. And that's one of the things that we want the tool to be able to be modified so that if you have better evidence in your state to change that it's a it's not a user input, but it is a user modification. So I'll just say that is usually a 5-hour presentation. We give this presentation once a year to state regulators and utilities. And it's a one-day event with about 2 hours of breaks. And I condense a lot of it. I cut out big chunks of it. So thank you all for bearing with me. And happy to answer as many questions as I left a lot of things unsaid, and I'm sure the many smart brains in this room are thinking about those things. So happy to open up to questions.
Thank you, Joe. That was wonderful. And I want to ask you a question that you asked the audience, but we didn't get your answer. How soon do you think we could end energy poverty? Or maybe that's not something you are allowed to say on camera.
So RMI is a nonprofit. We raise about 90% of our money through philanthropic funding. And when I'm talking to funders, it's a matter of how much money they're giving me. That was supposed to be a joke, but nobody laughed. So, okay, reading the room, understand. I genuinely think that the states have an appetite to address energy affordability. I think there is a window to get it done in the 2030, 2035 timeline. I think that the community of individuals and groups and companies working on this issue are woefully underprepared and under-resourced. So if we, it is a joke, and it's also serious, that if we don't find ways for federal funding, for philanthropic funding to actually implement these problems and actually have these conversations, then it will never happen for those people who voted that way. You're absolutely right. That is a very real possibility. But I do think that there is a window right now, post-pandemic, pre-fully recovery, affordability crisis, there is, the iron is hot, so to speak.
Well, we do have several minutes for questions, and we would love to hear yours. So I see many hands. I'll go one by one.
Hi, thanks for the talk. So one thing that came through, and this is probably not, I don't find it an especially surprising thing, is that in many ways energy poverty is sort of a outcome of just poverty, right? Like you mentioned that, and I'm sure this isn't perfect, but you mentioned there's certainly a strong correlation between people experiencing these issues and being below the federal poverty line or within some threshold of the federal poverty line. And so with that in mind, I'm curious, I'm thinking about the sort of 6 concrete policy recommendations that you made. Obviously, some of those are very specific to the energy space, and rightly so, disconnection fees. That's a very kind of specific thing that is obviously sort of an exploitative practice and falls in with the sort of broadly known pattern of it's expensive to be poor and all of these kinds of things. But I'm curious, some of them it struck me as, do these need to be sort of targeted in the energy space, or, going along your point about kind of administrative burden, could they be sort of at almost a higher level? Like the obvious example to me would be the direct assistance piece. Would it be better for that to piggyback on a broader class, broader set of direct assistance policies that help, address poverty writ large, not so specific to energy? I mean, I'm curious, A, do you agree with that premise? Feel free to push back if not, but B, sort of how do you think about the pros and cons of structuring things one way or the other?
Yeah. No, I think you're spot on in terms of this being part of a larger problem. And I don't see any technical reason why it should be carved out that way. I think there's 2 reasons why I focus it the way I focus it. The one is very unsatisfying, and I will fully admit that it's an unsatisfying answer. It's that I work on electricity. That's what I do. My partner works on food systems, and I'm sure if you talked with them, they would have plenty to say on food affordability and SNAP and how that needs bigger, more systemic solutions. But this is the world that I live and breathe, and that's why I focus on it. The second is a little bit more pragmatic, and that is the benefits to society for having people being able to afford their electricity are somewhat unique. And the way that we pay for it is somewhat unique, it being a regulated industry. Even in Pennsylvania, which is restructured, and some people call that deregulated, your distribution utility, the utility that actually disconnects people, is still a regulated entity. And so that benefit of, hey, when somebody pays their electric bill, your rates go down, that isn't true with food. That isn't true with housing. Although maybe there's an argument to be made that there's second order effects in the interest rates when on-time payments are, I don't know. But generally speaking, there isn't that direct connection. So the fact that we can have cost-effective, ratepayer-funded programs means there's a pathway to solving this problem that I don't readily see with others. Now, if I were a legislative director for a elected official, right, I might want to step back and think about the larger problem. But my lane in our ecosystem is regulated utilities. And so that's what I tend to focus on. But it's like the highway system in the United States. There are lots of lanes, maybe even too many lanes. So don't feel the need to follow me in my lane. If your lane is the broader thing, go for that.
Thank you so much for the presentation. Can you hear me okay?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So I'm from the School of Architecture, so obviously my question has to do with buildings. We've been looking at electricity usage of over 1,000 homes in an underserved community. And what we've been noticing is that it's actually a lot more effective to identify homes or people that are in that category of energy poverty using electricity data. And a major problem are actually buildings, because buildings are why you use a lot of energy in some ways. So my question is twofold. One is, I think what you're doing is wonderful, and I want to kind of learn more about it, and I think we should definitely do it. But by just solving the financial, we're not really solving climate change, because we're just using more and more, and it's not using, it's wasting more and more, because these homes are like Swiss cheese. You lose a lot of energy. And then the other part of it is, do you see a future where we can actually target buildings first before we kind of think about the financial and then all the policy? Is there a future where buildings are first? Because I think they're the major cause of energy poverty. Yeah,
you're probably well aware of this, but for the folks that might not be, one of the biggest reasons for weatherization assistance projects to fail is that during the retrofit process, they identify that the roof is not safe, and therefore they scrap the whole project because they can't cover the roof fix. But if the roof collapses or is leaking, then all of the other retrofits that they're doing become less effective, and so they scrap the whole project. So absolutely, building stock and building infrastructure is incredibly important and a major barrier to being able to get to 100% adoption, right? The tool, you can just put a little scale, 100% adoption, and then magically that happens in the simulation. But in the real world, that's not how it works. So yes, I agree with everything you said, but I will bump on one specific word. That's you said first, because I don't think it's about this first, this second. It's everybody has a lane, right? Same is true with this. We should be doing all of this together. And shameless plug to RMI. That's why we have a buildings program. I have a whole set of colleagues that work exclusively on building infrastructure and looking at this issue. It's just, again, I hate to make this the theme of my talk because it's not intended to be, but not my lane. And so not what my focus and my expertise is in. But you're not wrong in any way.
Thank you very much. This is a really interesting talk. So I guess I have kind of, my question is based on two things. One is Annie Lowry at the Atlantic has, I think it's the time tax, the kind of how there are programs, but yes, you can get SNAP benefits, but you're going to have to go prove that you actually are eligible and the cost to actually do that. And then I also think about, the individuals actually implementing a program, maybe like the local electricity provider, maybe there's dozens within a state, I don't know exactly, but there's going to be multiple implementations. And so I'm thinking about if each company that's implementing this has different definitions around like, oh, well, to decide on income, we're going to require these documents or this or this or that. And so I'm kind of curious on your thoughts about how important it is for, let's say, policymakers are thinking about adding certain language to allow this, how important it is that things like the time burden is being specified, saying like, hey, if you're doing a program like about this, you can't have these dramatic requirements, or we're really encouraging the most automatic version of this to reduce that burden.
Yeah, and I think the enrollment barriers and administrative costs are really not well understood, or they're understood, but I think just the size is not really well grasped. So I wish it was as many people as you seem to think working at a utility on these. It's typically a very small team. Duke Energy Progress, which is a fairly large utility, I think has like 3 people. It's a very small team. It's not a lot. But one of the members of the team told me that they were looking at a percentage of income payment plan. They were like, all right, we want to propose that to our regulator. So it wasn't coming from policymakers. I mean, it wasn't coming from at least elected policymakers. It was just the utility thought this would be a good idea. And they started talking to the other utilities across the country that have it, and they started running their numbers, and they came to the conclusion, I didn't review their calculations, but their conclusion was the administrative costs were going to be more than the actual benefits delivered. And so they said, we're just going to do an automatic bill credit. Like, we're not going to try to calculate the exact right amount. We're just going to give everybody who is enrolled in, is eligible for SNAP, eligible for LIHEAP, eligible for anything. We're going to talk to our state agency, get a list of names and addresses. If we cross-reference them to customer bill accounts and they match, we're going to give them $26 a month. And the administrative costs were tens of thousands of dollars, and the benefits were, I'm sure now, probably hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars. And they found it to be really effective. So there are ways to reduce those administrative costs. Self-attestation is one. The data matching is another. I think what's really important is at a state level, you have consistency, right? I would love for there to be consistency across the states. And as much as I joke that the complexities and nuances from state to state keep me employed sometimes, the reality is it would be better if they just had a singular system. But the policy goals and priorities and preferences of North Carolina look really different than Michigan. And so those 2 states are never going to have the exact same. But within a state, what you don't want is, to harp back on Duke Energy Progress and Duke Energy Carolinas both operate in North Carolina. You don't want those 2 utilities to have different standards.
Thank you. That was a really good talk. I have a question that I didn't really hear commented in your presentation. So there's been a systemic underinvestment in our infrastructure system for electricity, and we're going to have to play catch up, whether it's adding transmission or adding distribution or adding power plants. So set aside the whole issue about the projected load of data centers, right? You still got to meet basic load growth, right? So there's going to be that component added to bills. How do you see that factoring into this mix, and does it complicate the issue of trying to address energy affordability?
Well, I'm going to answer your question by making the question, by taking one of the things that you specifically told me not to include and include it, right? So this is the idea of making the problem bigger to make the solution easier. Because I think load growth is actually an opportunity. Don't get me wrong, it also represents a real threat to affordability, right? If we get how we pay for load growth wrong, it will raise everybody's bills. But there's also an avenue, if we get the cost allocation correctly, if we get the tariffs done correctly, we can lower electric rates for everybody because we're going to have more kilowatt hours to spread those fixed costs around. So the theory is it works out. It's more kilowatt hours, that's fine. The math also works. So one of the teams that I lead is the utility finance and business models work. And we looked at cost allocation in an era of load growth. We looked at transportation electrification, in residential electrification as well as larger loads. And under the right conditions, which I know is like a really vague caveat, but under the right conditions, you can create a cost allocation system or cost allocation methodology so that load growth essentially pays for all of the new investments that we need to do in the existing grid, or a disproportionate, I think would be the right mathematical term, of those costs. So they're paying their fair share plus just a little bit extra, but when load is doubling, just a little bit extra does a lot of work. Does that make sense? I feel like I think he's gonna have a follow-up question.
It's just that we don't know how many of these data centers are going to be built out, so we can't necessarily bank on that as a solution. So that's why I said if we take those off the table, we still have load growth that we have to plan for, and how are we going to do that in this sense?
Yeah, so there's two things. There's one is, yes, there's uncertainty in that load growth, but it's not uncertain. Listen, if you were to ask me to take a bet on how much load growth would be, that'd be a very risky bet. But if you were to ask me to say, will load grow over the next 15 years, that's a much less risky endeavor, right? So we acknowledge the uncertainty of how much load growth, but we understand that the environment is different enough that we say, okay, the current approaches to cost allocation in a world of flat to declining load look much different in terms of delivering benefits to existing customers than where you have this opportunity. So the question is, like, how do we take advantage of that opportunity and treat it like an opportunity rather than treat it like a threat? Because the other option is this. We make load growth and data centers pay for their fair share and nothing more. We completely island them from the system, and we still have to invest in the current system, and that load is flat, and that will raise rates and will raise bills. So I was actually just talking to Costa about this earlier, like load growth, if we can make data centers and AI load growth a vehicle for affordability, we actually pave a way for electrification of vehicles, of buildings, of everything else also to be a vehicle for affordability.
Hi, I know you said maybe not your lane exactly, but I'm curious about how utility ownership structure in terms of like co-ops and municipal utilities compares to IOUs, and also how states with appointed commissioners versus elected, if you see a difference in affordability, and also if you see a difference in the potential to adopt policies that might, like if states with elected commissioners act differently than appointed.
Yeah, it's a great question. I was at the National Association of State Utility Commissioners, NARUC, Regulated Utility Commissioners, in November. Was it November? Yeah. And one of the elected commissioners was moderating a panel. And he opened up the panel with, my first question to all of the panelists is, how do I keep my job? Right? Elected commissioners are incredibly worried about affordability. And anybody who is deeply tracking this maybe already knows about the commission elections in Georgia, where they have had the same commissioners for a very long time. Two what were once considered very popular commissioners both got, two incumbents both lost on affordability, very, very explicitly on affordability. So I think there's an opportunity there. But let's not pretend that non-elected commissioners are immune from political wins, right? Every regulated utility commission is there for politics, right? Either they are appointed by a governor or approved by a legislation, like a legislative body, or elected, right? So we've seen commissioners in Michigan and in Connecticut not get renominated or get asked to resign, not in those two states, but in other states, because of unpopular positions that they've taken. So the populist movement for affordability is absolutely an opportunity for, regardless of elected or appointed or whatever. I will only weigh in on the public power versus regulated versus in DC, because that's where I live. I'm a ratepayer there, so I think I've earned a right to say what I think works there. In Minnesota, in Pennsylvania, like, I'm not a ratepayer here, so that's like not really my business, which is different than like not my lane, right? Like some people would be perfectly willing to maybe pay more in order to get XYZ benefits, or pay less and forego, whatever level of control as they see it. Where I think the conversation people miss the conversation is historically, by and large, regulated entities are more transparent. There is a system to get access to that data. Nebraska is all public power. So there's Omaha public power, Nebraska public power, everybody there gets public power. Try doing data requests for those companies in that state. Like, people on the board of the utility have a hard time getting access to operational data. So I'm not convinced that like it is a purely benefit to move to public power or to move to cooperatives. Cooperatives have lower rates, but they also have much higher levels of disconnection, right? So there's trade-offs to all of this. Now that doesn't mean, and also like, let's be honest, just because that's how co-ops have operated in the past, that doesn't mean it's a foregone conclusion in the future, right? We shouldn't, we can be informed by the past, but we shouldn't like let that dictate how we think about the future. I think it's a really popular conversation. I think it's a really valuable conversation, and we just need to be clear-eyed about it.
Hello. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk about this. I come from the neighborhood here where I am working to try to manage the water problems that we have. And the young lady here that talked about buildings and the problems with electricity because of the buildings. I don't know if you're aware, in Pennsylvania right now, we are in drought, and we are in drought in anticipating drought in a large part of the state. All of this has to do with electricity, because every time you use electricity, you're using water. There's a national focus on our state because of the water that we have here, and we are losing the groundwater. All of your concerns about how much electricity the goal is for you to lower bills and help people with electric poverty by 2030 or 2035, from my perspective, we should be managing the lights in this building. We should be more concerned with managing the future load as opposed to continuing to be the slaves of the large corporations that are running this. Why do I say that? Recently, working with the water problem, and the increased bills are going to be regulated, but at the end of the day, the water is publicly traded. So you have government that is trying to satisfy the needs of shareholders, and your electric is all based on water. There's not enough water in the world to continue to do what we're doing. And my question is, can you help to control that by the programs that you're looking at? Should you maybe be looking into a program that manages the electricity and try to conserve that?
Yeah, I think conservation, in addition to efficiency, are an important part, right? I talked about how there are policies and programs and efforts to keep the cost down for everybody, not just, and those are valuable, right? if we don't have those, if we don't have efforts to keep the costs down for everybody, then the effort to deliver benefits to targeted, most vulnerable, most in need actually become untenable. So we need both. We need to both think about the interconnectivity between the gas, electric, and water systems, both in bulk systems as well as for the individual consumer. We need to care about the average costs as well as the individual costs, as well as the disproportionate burden borne across different income groups, across, one of the things I didn't even get to talk about, one of the things I got cut from this was it's not just low income, right? We are best positioned to measure the impacts on low income because that's one of the things that we track. But there is also increasing evidence that it's fixed income populations that are disproportionately impacted, particularly by price volatility, where they manage for a $150 bill every month and they can afford that. But if there's a spike in prices and they get a $200 bill, then they fall behind and they start that energy poverty cycle. There's a wealth of information that even for accounting for income groups, that immigrant populations, black populations, will have higher energy burdens, have higher energy costs, have higher energy consumption, right? So it is a, people call the electric grid the most complicated machine ever built, and it is physically, it's the physics of it are, but when you add the layer of regulatory and policy and social dynamic on top of it, it is, just an astronomically complicated and interconnected system.
These have been great questions. We have time for one final question, and then we'll go to this gentleman in the front.
So you mentioned earlier about the restructured states. There were 13 restructured states. Pennsylvania is one of them. Pennsylvania restructured almost 30 years ago, and up until 2025, that has generally benefited the ratepayer. It's a pass-through cost to the regulated utility. Otherwise, the utilities and the regulated programs that you talk about cannot touch that. But with the dramatic increase that we saw across this region from the electric grid, including yourself in DC, how can those two policies align when all the programs you advocated for don't touch the dramatic increase we saw in 2025 and we'll see now for several years going forward for the cost of electricity in the deregulated markets?
So a couple things. One, not in every restructured state are the discounts only to the distribution. Like there are commissions that have decided that even though the distribution utility has, functionally no control over wholesale prices, that the discount that they provide to low-income customers still has to include a discount on the wholesale. So you've taken something out of the utility's control, and so it's very touchy. Like utilities and commissions in states like DC, DC's low-income program, the discount is only to the distribution portion, but it is so large that it's like, the effect is still 30% discount or something like that. So it's effectively free distribution, and they only charge for the wholesale. So there's like different ways around that. So that's one. Two is wholesale power markets in the U.S. really came out of an era of expected load growth that didn't show up. We were building coal, gas, and nuclear as much as we could in anticipation for continued load growth, and that growth did not show up, and there was huge amounts of stranded assets. The idea was we can shift the risk of overbuilding off of the ratepayers and onto the developers by creating wholesale power markets and restructuring the utilities. We basically got RTOs in an era of no load growth. Like that's where RTOs have operated. That now is a brand new era for them. And so I'm nervous but excited about how an era of load growth is going to change how restructured states operate because they need to find a different idea. Bilateral contracts, are one of the things that I hear talking about a lot of like, all right, well, let's segment. Let's allow the utilities to hedge and sign bilateral contracts for firm power. How do we have the new sources of load bring their own capacity? How do we essentially match supply and demand in a more proactive way? I don't know what the end product is going to look like, but if I were a betting man, I would say RTOs look fundamentally different in 5 years, whether or not the load shows up, whether or how much shows up, because the simple expectation is now creating the reality that we're in right now.
Okay, so because we're almost at the end, one thing that would be great since we're at Carnegie Mellon Research Institution is just to hear from you if there's any future research directions you hope to take this work into, right? You mentioned wanting to potentially collaborate with us here at CMU. We have a lot of very smart people still in the room. Y'all are the most dedicated because you stay till the end. So we know who the most dedicated is here at CMU as well. So yeah, just wanted to give you an opportunity about that.
Thank you. Yeah, so there is no shortage of work to be done. I got to talk to a few PhD students earlier about their research and was like, oh, I remember 5 years ago trying to find this, and I could not find this information. I'm so glad that finally somebody's going to actually have the time to do the work. So yeah, I mean, I couldn't possibly come up with a comprehensive list, but the things that I think are of most interest right now is some of the work that your group is doing around how income, heat, cool, weather, how all of these, the interactions and responses to all of this. I think price elasticity of residential retail customers is an amazing opportunity because there's a lot of folks, including RMI, that are, tout the benefits of time of use rates, right? And say that this will better align long-term costs, so we need to have time of use rates. But time of use rates only work if people respond to them. And there is a real shortage of data that says whether or not they respond, at what prices do they respond, what price differentials. Does it have to be technology enabled, or can it be just individuals know and respond based off of their daily habits? Very little information out there in the world on that. The climate, how climate change is going to affect heating degree days and cooling degree days and the policies that we have in place. Most states that have disconnection protections only have wintertime disconnection protections. But we're going to need less and less of that. We still need it, but we're going to need more and more summertime disconnection protections because the summer heat waves are going to be when electric bills go up, people get disconnected, and it hits 105, and even healthy people cannot live in that environment, let alone vulnerable populations, elderly and medically compromised individuals. So that's a huge area of needed work. Oh man, I wish next time give me this prompt ahead of time so that I can show up prepared on the spot. Man, I will say that the thing that we are most excited about taking this specific tool is it's just electric, because we can model that really well in isolation. But in any given state, you might be an electric customer and a gas customer, just an electric customer in delivered fuels. There's a lot of different permutations that the way that we set up the model didn't allow us to account for. And so we're going to try to figure out a way to create archetypes within the state that really represents the different types of customers in that state. So that's how we're planning on using that, which is the reason I bring this up is I think one of the great things about the work that is being done at Carnegie Mellon is that it is very applied. It is about actually not just doing research for research's sake, but rather about, all right, how do we use this to inform popular opinion or public policy or whatever vector that we're looking at? And I think the one thing that I wish I knew when I was in grad school was not every analysis has to be everything for everybody. And it wasn't until I was working I became the official spokesperson for the energy team at Union of Concerned Scientists. So if we didn't have an expert on hand, I was expected to comment on energy topics. And the media preparation and training that I got there was one product, one analysis for one person. Like everything should be done in mind with an archetypal person in mind. And that might be a state regulator, it might be a state legislator, but those are different types of people that understand systems differently and have power to act in different ways. And so if you say the same thing to two radically different people, you will not have the same level of efficacy. And so really tailoring what your work is, not just the messaging, but the level of rigor that you need to apply. Like, I have news for you. Legislators do not expect, like this is way more robust than most legislators need, and not robust enough for what regulators need. So this is great at starting conversations, and great for policymakers because it's one step above what they need. But like the back of the envelope calculation that I did 5 years ago, where I was just like, I mean, I'm not even joking, it was on a piece of scrap paper. Like that got into federal legislation proposals, like that number, because they just needed something that had some level of defensibility to it, that they could say, this is why we came up with this number. So there are different levels of robustness that you need. I'm sure thesis advisors might have some pushback on that, so don't. Yeah.
All right, sweet. So thank you so much. This electricity discussion has really sparked some new ideas for all of us. So just have to give a lot of thanks. So thank you first and foremost to the Scott Energy Institute for hosting and helping organize. We also want to thank Gina out of Civil and Environmental Engineering for coordinating all the scheduling, and thank you also to the CERCA team out of CMU for also helping to promote this. And then last but not least, we want to, of course, thank Joe Daniel once again for coming all the way up from DC to talk with us and hang out with us for the day. So let's give a big round of applause.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you.
And then last but not least, I have been told to encourage all the students to definitely submit those posters to Energy Week. To encourage you, I will give you all extra credit in my class. I am not teaching this semester, but just know that in the class of life, you will get extra credit. So please do submit those posters to CMU Student Energy Week. And thank you guys all for staying until the end.